Zambia's social and economic development is heavily dependent on agriculture and mining. This makes the country vulnerable to climate change. Climate change is an idea that you may have heard of. And so today on the program, we'll try and unpack what this is and why we should care about it. Welcome to the second episode of Think 2044. I'm your host, Macpherson Mukuka. And today on the program, we'll be discussing climate change and the Think 2044 campaign. But before we go further in the program, let's take a break.
Climate change is real. Get involved. Start a green conversation today. Think 2044. Call the free hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, under the Ministry of National Development Planning with support from the World Bank Group and the Africa Development Bank.
Welcome back. This is Think 2044, and today we are discussing climate change and the Think 2044 campaign. Joining me in studio is the National Coordinator for Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, Mrs. Chitembo Chunga. Mrs. Chunga, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Mkuka.
I'm also joined by Mr. Anderson Banda from Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit. He is Head Information Management Systems. Mr. Banda, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Also joining me is Mr. Ephraim Shitima from the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. Mr. Shitima, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Macpherson. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Chunga, please give us a brief overview of the pilot program for climate resilience in Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. Mukuka. As you rightly put it, climate change is here to stay, and Zambia is responding to the climate change. And in responding to climate change, the government of the Republic of Zambia has a flagship project, which is the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, and is responding to the issues that climate change is bringing about on the livelihoods of the Zambian people. And how are we responding using the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience? We are adapting, promoting adaptive measures and also mitigation interventions in the pilot project area where we're operating from. And this pilot project, and as earlier alluded to, is a flagship project. So we're in Western Province, Southern Province, Lusaka, and Central Province, basically the Kafue and the Barossa sub-basins. Thank you.
Mr. Shitima, what role does your ministry play in relation to climate change?
Thank you very much. Under the National Policy on Climate Change of 2016, there are various functions that have been assigned to different institutions. In the case of the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, we are responsible for the coordination of implementation of climate change programs. What that means is that we coordinate the implementation of what other various sectors are doing on climate change. But this needs to be distinguished very well, because I'm sure as we proceed, you'll learn that in the case of overall coordination, because we have coordination at two levels, overall coordination is by the Ministry of National Development Planning to link that into our national development process. But at the technical level, in terms of implementation, it's the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources.
Thank you. Mr. Banda, what are some of the disasters that Zambia has experienced as a result of climate change?
Yes, I think in answering your question, it's very important to note that there is the issue of climate change, which is now acceptable that it is with us, and also issues of climate variability, which is the normal changes which happen in the climate. But what we are saying with climate change, to answer your question in relation to Zambia, the issues which we have been grappling with are the issues of flooding, issues of drought, and also issues relating to the changes in the temperature. And in the past 40 or so years or 4 decades, research has shown that the intensity and the frequency of these disasters has actually increased, especially in relation to floods. And you may see that in the past maybe decade, that's when we have had a number of flooding situations in the country increasing in terms of frequency and intensity.
Mrs. Chunga, you did indicate that the PPCR program is being implemented in 2 provinces, that is Northwestern Province and part of Southern Province. I just want to find out, what is the response you're getting from the residents in these areas?
The response has been very positive. We've been there since 2013, and we are seeing the response to be positive because people are now personally taking it up, asking questions on what is climate change, what do they need to change in their livelihoods, in the way they do things, in the way they do business, so that they respond to climate change, they mitigate against further worsening the environment, they also adapt to the changing environment. And then they are also asking us several times that what role can I play in order for me as a Zambian living in the pilot area, what role can I play for me to ensure I contribute to adapting to the changing environment or mitigate against that. So the response has been very positive, and this is both from the community members, the private sector, very minimal though, the traditional leadership, government, stakeholders, and civil society organizations, to mention but a few.
25,000 households is quite a huge number to target in this project. What is the progress so far?
So far, we've reached over 10,000 households in the project areas, and we are remaining. Initially, we should have concluded by 2019 December, but because we're bringing on board a private sector component, which is just starting this year, later in September this year, so we've been asked to extend the implementation period to 2022. So that is going to make us reach even way beyond the 25,000 targeted.
Thank you so much. Mr. Banda, what are some of the strategic measures that the MMU is putting in place in combating climate change effects?
McPherson, climate change, just like disaster risk reduction, is a very cross-cutting issue, and it involves a lot of sectors which are affected negatively. But for the disaster management regime in the country, the National Disaster Management Policy gives us a number of roles. And one of the roles is actually for us to make sure that vulnerability assessments are carried out, which inform actions in terms of adaptation. Also, we are talking about issues relating to early warning. We make sure that we put in place early warning mechanisms. And when we talk about early warning mechanisms, it's to make sure that the institutions which are responsible, especially for issues in relation to hydrometeorological disasters, put in place those early warning issues. In particular, DMMU has been carrying out, of course, from the government support, and also with support from projects like the pilot program for climate resilience, the PPCR, an initiative we're calling the community-based disaster risk management. And this is an area where we are making sure that issues of early warning are encouraged, and also issues of adaptation, both community-based adaptation and ecosystem-based adaptation, to make sure that people actually adapt to climate change.
Mr. Stima, are there any programs that the ministry is putting in place? We know there is the PPCR program by the Minister of National Development Planning. Is the Minister of Lands putting any programs in view of the fight against climate change?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I can take a government-wide approach. We've made efforts, I think starting from 2007, the first formal response to climate change by government, when we developed the National Adaptation Plan of Action, the NAPA. From that time in 2007, that plan identified the sectors that are most vulnerable to climate change. And these were listed as the water sector, the energy sector, the agricultural sector, the health sector, and the natural resources, meaning wildlife and forests. There were about 10 project profiles in that plan that were worked out for implementation. So far, we've had about 5 that have been implemented. These are in agriculture, for example, adaptation in agriculture that has been in Southern Province, parts of Western and Lusaka. Then we've had a project in early warning, implemented by the Meteorological Department. At the moment, we have a program that is being implemented by the Forestry Department, which is promoting the regeneration of natural forests. So we've had a number of projects and programs that have been implemented to respond to climate change in various sectors. From the ministry's perspective, we may not be specifically implementing like I indicated. What we do largely is coordinating the implementation. So we would work on plans, develop with stakeholders, identify projects that need to be implemented, and then when support is sourced or mobilized either from internal and external sources, we coordinate the implementation of those projects.
You are still watching Think 2044, and today we are discussing climate change and the Think 2044 campaign. Let's take a short break and get some information from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
Trees cover 30% of our planet. They play a huge part in absorbing gases such as carbon dioxide, which is turned into oxygen. Thousands of trees are cut down every year for charcoal production, agricultural purposes. Dry, infertile land leading to crop failure, inflation and hunger. All this contributing to the climate change. Climate change is real. Plant a tree, save the earth. Get involved.
Think 2044. Call the 3 hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Ministry of National Development Planning, Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, with support of the World Bank Group and the African Development Bank.
You're still watching Think 2044, and today we are discussing climate change and the Think 2044 campaign. Mr. Stima, before we went on a break, you did talk about the sectors that are affected by climate change. What are some of these sectors?
Yeah, these sectors include the water sector, the agricultural sector, and they are interrelated. Then you have the health sector, you come to energy, natural resources, which includes forest and wildlife. Maybe just to talk a bit about this. For the water sector, some people actually refer to climate change as water change because that's the first thing that gets affected. It's either you have inadequate rainfall or precipitation, or you have too much of it. Either of those are not good for the sector. Then for the energy sector, like in our case, as we know, most of our energy is hydropower based. So any change in the hydrological cycle and the amount of water that we receive impacts on our energy sector directly. And I think we had that experience about 2 years ago. For natural resources like wildlife and forests, again, these thrive with a certain level of water that they require to grow. And for the animals, when they graze, in the first place, the pasture that they have to graze has to be supported by water, and then even them, they need to drink water and all that, so you find that that gets affected. Health may sound a bit distant, but it also gets affected in that it changes the factors where they can survive, and it also accentuates, if you look at the waterborne diseases, depending on the water that you have, waterborne diseases can increase. There have been examples of areas that were not malaria infested in the past, but because of the changes in the climate, those become malaria prone. So those are the sectors and some of the direct effects that arise from climate change.
Over 1 million households in Zambia are hydropower dependent. And you have indicated that the water sector is one of the sectors that is affected by climate change. Are there calls by the ministry to ensure that there is diversification from dependence on hydropower, probably to solar?
Yeah, I think government as a whole has taken a step to, we can't abandon hydropower per se because we need that in certain areas, and it has supported us over the years, it still has the capacity. But the issue is to increase our energy mix, not to be dependent solely on hydropower generated electricity. And so there is a very increased speed in terms of how we are moving to other sources such as solar, wind power, and other renewable energy sources. But particularly solar, I think there has been increased efforts in ensuring that we increase the supply of solar power to households.
Interesting. Mrs. Chunga, what is the Think 2044 campaign about?
The Think 2044 campaign is a slogan which is trying to evoke the Zambian people to be very aware about the discussion of climate change. We want them to be discussing it in their homes, at the workplaces, wherever they are. They need to think about climate change, how it's affecting their future. So it's basically to remind every Zambian citizen about the need to be good stewards of our environment and of the world, because our environment, when we take care of our Zambian environment, we are contributing to taking care of the world environment. So we need to be responsible citizens, and then we need to remember and consider our future generations, so that since climate change has come to stay. So it's a slogan which we want to make Zambian people to start thinking about how are we doing our production, what consumption measures do we change, what do I eat, how do I produce how I eat, how do I do away with what I've eaten, all those things. So I want the discussion to be very broad, and we want the youth, the women, every person in Zambia to be discussing climate change, how they're contributing to it being negatively affecting our livelihoods, and how what role they can play to mitigate and adapt to it.
This is something that we are talking about 26 years from now. What will happen in 2044?
Well, some analysis was undertaken from the 1970s up to somewhere around 2010, looking at the changes in the climate, as earlier alluded to by Mr. Banda. So when we did the vulnerability assessment, 2044 stood out as a year in which, if we went ahead doing business as usual, the way we've been doing business, I don't care about the environment. In the year 2044, it's anticipated from that analysis that there will be flooding in northern Muchinga, Luapula, and Copperbelt provinces.
Mr. Banda, we have heard of the effects that will come in 2044. Is DMMU putting any procedures or measures that will follow in order to combat these effects that we are expecting in 2044?
The disaster management regime in the country, and again from the perspective of climate change, our role actually is to make sure that we have in place response and preparedness measures. And the aspect of climate change, like my colleagues have already alluded to, it affects all the sectors. And the key sectors we are looking at from the DMMU perspective as well is what we are calling the food, energy, and water nexus. There's a connection there between food, energy, and water nexus. And we are making sure that we put in place preparedness measures, we put in place response measures to those things. And in doing that, our role and our approach is to make sure that all the sectors, because disaster risk management, like I mentioned at the beginning, is a cross-cutting issue.
Mr. Chitima, in view of the projections of Think 2044 and what will come, what will happen to Zambia's natural resources if we don't work towards fighting climate change?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe before coming to that, if I may just add a point. If you remember in the media not too long ago, there were news items about Cape Town and the D-Day. So this is the importance of preparing for climate change, where either through modeling or assessments like Mrs. Chunga indicated, you anticipate what is going to befall upon the country or society so that you plan in how to respond. Thankfully for Cape Town, the water didn't completely run down as they anticipated because the conditions improved. We are fortunate we are talking of 2044, which is a bit far but not too far away. It gives us time to prepare. But in terms of natural resources or the environment, if we don't do anything, the immediate outcome is degradation of our natural resource base. Now, you know, our development, our socio-economic development depends on the utilization of natural resources. So once those are degraded, it means it affects our socio-economic development directly. What that means is that our goal to become a prosperous middle-income country by 2030 probably would be jeopardized. So it's something that requires quite urgent attention.
Talking of the drying up of groundwater, in Chongwe, nearly every year when it gets to October, the Chongwe River dries up. What do we need to do to ensure that such does not occur in future?
Exactly. I think it's not only Chongwe River, but other rivers in the country are drying up. But probably with Chongwe and other rivers and streams which are near urban areas, there are multiple factors contributing to that. Apart from just climate change, the socio-economic activities, if people are cultivating or clearing trees near the headwaters of a particular river, you know that it would be affected in terms of its flows. So rivers like Chongwe and others have been affected, yes, of course, by climate change, but this is exacerbated by the human activities around them, particularly around the catchment areas. We need to be serious and ensure that the catchment areas, the sources of major rivers like the Zambezi, the Kafue, and the Longwa are protected, because once those are undermined, it means that the flows in the rivers down their streams would be affected, and that's the typical case that is happening to Chongwe.
Mrs. Chunga, what is the strategic overview of the Think 2044 campaign?
The strategic overview, as earlier alluded to, is to ensure that everyone starts talking. And when everyone starts talking, it means we're all going to be responsive to the climate change issues. Mr. Chitima has just alluded to the issue that if my livelihood is dependent on forests and I need to do charcoal, we need to start thinking that how else can I have my source of energy apart from cutting down trees? Yes, we need to cook, we need to be kept warm, but we need to find alternative ways of providing that warmth. So when everybody's talking, it's going to make policy change easier, it's going to inform decision makers make the correct decisions that are going to help us as a nation move on a climate resilient development pathway.
Mr. Chitima, in your closing remarks, what should be the way forward?
I think the way forward is to ensure that information is disseminated, because people have to respond at the individual and household levels, and particularly in the rural communities, because these are the people who are closer to the natural resources and all those that may be heavily impacted. So the dissemination of information, packaging, and ensuring that this information reaches the people who need to respond on it is important and can't be overemphasized.
Great. Mr. Banda, the way forward?
The way forward, like my colleague has said, is for us to make sure that we have enough information. Climate change is a global problem, and it should be tackled at all levels, at global level, national level, and at community level, to make sure that we create resilience for the communities out there as the livelihoods are being affected negatively.
Mrs. Chunga, your closing remarks.
Thank you so much. For us, the train has left the platform, and we are glad that the Think 24 campaign has started off, and we want everybody to be talking, and especially we want the women and the youth, because they are the most highly affected by the climate change, and if they jump on board, we are glad. As Mr. Chitima earlier alluded to, we will try to unpack the adaptation, what it means, and mitigation, so that everybody understands what this is, and so become more resilient, and make sure that the Zambian climate resilient development pathway is attained. We want to thank very much the people that we collaborate with, the various organizations, that is government line ministries and the various agencies. We wouldn't want to mention one by one, we may miss out one, which wouldn't be so good. But we also want to thank the provincial administrations in the 4 provinces where we're working, and the districts, the traditional leadership, and to thank most sincerely also our financiers, the funders, the World Bank Group, the African Development Bank, and the Nordic Development Fund. We thank them for partnering with the government of Zambia in this program and in this pilot project for climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You heard right, our dear viewer. Climate change is real, and the time to act is now, and Think 2044. This is where we come to the end of today's discussion. We've been looking at climate change and the Think 2044 campaign. I have been your host, Mark Fason Mkukand. In studio, I was not alone. I was joined by the National Coordinator for Pilot Program Climate Change Resilience, Mrs. Chitembo Chunga, and Mr. Anderson Banda from the Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit. Also was Mr. Ephraim Chitima from the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. Make sure you join us next time for yet another exciting Think 2044 edition. For now, it's goodbye and God bless you.
Think 2044. Do you realize this world won't be the same always? Think 2044. We have to emphasize that we have to change our way. By 2044, the temperatures will fall, and the flash floods will come, and our crops will start to drown. But we can save our time. We can save this place, we go home. Yes. We go home. Think 2044. We can think 2044. 2044.